It has been an extraordinary year, and we find ourselves in a position where global things have overtaken us. And my own life has changed slightly as well. I'm now retired completely from the NHS, as the rest of the world seems to go on fire, both with with the pandemic and also with its politics. So it's a strange position to find myself in, but I'm in the now luxurious position of devoting virtually all of my time to the Trimontium Trust. And I see Ishbel there in the background, and as you know, she and Donald did exactly the same thing for many, many years in terms of shouldering huge amounts of activity. So I know exactly how it feels, but it's great actually to have the support of everybody to move on. But one of the things that has kept me going has been my love of the Iron Age, and particularly the Roman Iron Age. And during my deepest, darkest depression in the middle of the first wave of the pandemic, this place, the thought of going to this place kept me going. And I'll start the video going in a second, but this is a place called Trimontium, which is a hill fort in North Wales. It's very, very close to Carnarvon, and it's high up in the mountains. And if you do get the chance, I strongly recommend that you go there. Even me, with my slightly dodgy ticker, managed to get to the summit. And this has to be seen to be believed. It's the Machu Picchu of hill forts of Britain. So if you get the chance, go to Trimontium, which is near Carnarvon. And eventually, during the dip in the lockdown in September, we were actually able to go. And it really did rejuvenate my spirits for the year. So what else has been happening during this year? Well, a lot. The old exhibition closed at the end of the season last year, and we welcomed 2 new staff at the start of the year. Rob, who has introduced this evening's talk, and Francis, who's also here. Rob's our Heritage Resources Development Officer, and Francis is our Volunteer Coordinator. And many of you will have already met Rob and Francis. We're very grateful and very pleased to have them join the team. So you're going to be hearing from both of them a lot over the coming months and years. Much has happened at the museum itself. Most of the material which belonged to, it's quite noisy. Most of the material which belonged to the National Museum has gone back to Edinburgh, and the material that belonged to Live Borders has been stored at their headquarters. So all of the artifacts are safe while the building work goes underway. We've moved to our temporary accommodation, which many of you will have already visited here at Abbey House. We're quite fortunate to be in a central position with this temporary accommodation, and it's been quite an eye-opener to be in the centre of the town during what in effect is a major pandemic. And all of our artefacts that were belonging to the trust itself, or our replicas, were moved down early on. And this is Rachel's husband here, who gave us a big hand, along with Rob, in moving a lot of this stuff. And so too did the Melrose Rugby Club, which was very helpful indeed. So this is the temporary exhibition for those of you who have not been there yet. This is the interior of the main room, and you can see the relocation of some of the cases and some of our material. And it's been very tastefully decked out by, mainly by Rob and Francis, who have done a huge amount of work over the last 6 or 9 months. And we opened finally to visitors on the 20th of August. So we had a season which was only literally 2 months long, because we had to eventually close again at the end of October. And we had all the COVID guidelines to observe, and the front door had to remain open. And if those of you who have been in Abbey House will know it's not exactly a warm venue. So with the front door open, it was a bit chilly. But despite that, in those 2 months, we welcomed over 1,300 visitors, which is quite an impressive number, considering the circumstances that we were operating under. And our walkers, we had over 80 walkers during that same period. So it was a fabulous start to what was a very limited season. But it bodes well for the future. Also in September, we welcomed our construction company. They're based in Selkirk. They have offices in Selkirk and Carlisle, and they took on the monumental task of fitting out the interior of the museum room and the bottom hall. And you can see here the large steels and pins going in through the back wall of the Ormiston to support the lintel that is going to bridge the gap between the two buildings. Now, we are exceptionally grateful to the people of Melrose, but particularly the Hendersons who own Burps Hotel. They've seen the comings and goings of major articulated lorries coming through their car park, and they've done this with the greatest of grace. And there's been great communication between the builders and the local shop owners, so that's been very helpful indeed. And here's the sort of machinery that's going in and out of Burps car park, and has been on an almost daily basis. All of the heavy lifting now has largely been done, and you'll see a bit more in a second. This was the interior of the museum room once it had been emptied and the material moved to the various storage places. But this is how it looked within a couple of weeks. And you can see that it's an extraordinary space. There are a couple of things to note. One is the roof is incredibly high, which is one of the things that we had not fully visualized. And of course, that will be part of the museum design when you see it finished. In addition, there was a modern archaeological feature appeared in the ground, and you can see these 8 piles here. That's David Campbell, our museums designer, on the left, and on the right you can see Mike, who's the foreman from Cubbies, having a discussion about what these things actually were. They do look like hypocaust pillars for those of you who are regular visitors to Roman sites, but in fact these turned out to be the weight-bearing slabs for a Welsh slate billiard table that used to be in the Ormiston many decades ago. So they are now encased in the new floor as an archaeological feature. Some of you will have seen the fly-through of the museum design, but if you bear with me, I'm just going to take you on this virtual journey in through what is the link corridor. And you're faced with the initial exhibition, which is of the local Iron Age peoples. This is material from Eildon Hill North and from numerous sites throughout the borders. Fraser Hunter has been exceptionally helpful. He's curator of the Iron Age at the National Museum in Edinburgh, and he has been exceptionally helpful in helping us choose material. So too has Shona Sinclair from Live Borders, who's given us access to the Live Borders collection, which has seriously augmented our own material. There is a very large central case here, which is designed to show off all of this new material. There's a small cinema, and there is a new display of the pits and also of the Sinton coin hoard. And then down the extreme northern wall, which is our longest wall, which you'll see in a second if you don't get motion sickness, and this long wall is a display, a full display of the Roman army of both infantry and cavalry exhibits. A lot of these, as you can see, are at this point were our own replicas, but I'll give you an update on 2 new cases that are going in on that wall in a second. So that's pretty much the interior of the new room. In the middle here is a touch table with a 3-dimensional model of the fort that will be able to be manipulated by visitors. This is the new entrance area, designed to be, if you like, a contrast to the darker, more cosy element of the museum room. This is going to be our entrance and welcome area. It'll be open to the public, and they'll be able to come in and browse any of the Roman orientated stuff that we've got in there, and that'll be free of charge. It's only if they want to go through into the museum at the back that there'll be an entrance fee. And of course, all members of the trust, that will be free entry ad infinitum, as long as members are wanting to gain access. The museum centerpiece will be the touch table, and this is the three-dimensional model, the start anyway of the three-dimensional model. You can see there's only a single building that has been reconstructed so far. And this will be able to be negotiated and flown around and burrowed down into, so that you can see in greater detail some of the internal buildings, particularly the Principia and one of the barrack blocks. You'll be able to have a virtual walkthrough. So this is a work in progress. This model is just the basic terrain model showing the field layouts. We've also put together a Trimontium film that some of you will have seen in the Abbey House display, and that focuses, if you like, on Trimontium's place in the wider Borders landscape. But there are 3 or 4 new films underway being created at the moment to demonstrate things like the fabrication of bronze goods, pottery making, and so on. So the films that we've got will all be augmented and interrelated. So in the top right, you can see bronze casting. In the bottom, you can see glass bangles. These are samples that were found actually within the fort itself, and also intaglio carving. Now, we've had other people join the organisation in the recent past. We're very grateful to Lord Andrew Polwarth for asking the Duke of Gloucester, Prince Richard, to be our royal patron, who very readily agreed. He is an architect and a historian in his own right, and has taken a particular interest in the trust. And we're very pleased to say that he is prepared to come and support the trust in various different ways, but particularly with the official opening that will probably, fingers crossed, take place in September of 2021. There will be a preliminary opening before that, a so-called soft opening, so that we can iron out the various rough edges, and that will start probably at the end of June or just into July of next year. Another individual that's joined as a supporter is this chap. This is Holger Von Gramert. Most of you will not know who this is, but he is the CEO of Credit Suisse. He is a very eminent banker, and this is his living room. Holger has one of the largest collections, if not the largest collection, of Roman military equipment in the world. And he has taken a particular shine to our project and has offered to lend us a significant amount of material for both the legionary case and also the cavalry case. And when I asked him, you know, there are 3 helmets from Newstead, and of course the National Museum are not willing to part with those because they form a centrepiece of the exhibition in Edinburgh. There is only one other face mask from the rest of Britain. That's the Ribchester helmet, which is in the British Museum. So there actually only are 4 of these things in Britain, 3 of them in Edinburgh and 1 in Ribchester, 1 in London. And I asked Holger if he could lend us one, and he said yes. And I said, how many have you got? He said 25. So yeah, you can see that we're very, very fortunate to have Holger as a supporter. He's going to allow us to display material that we would otherwise not be able to have access to. So this is going to be a major boost to the visitor experience for the museum. Also, things move on with the electronic membership. We've now got nearly 13,000 followers on Twitter, and there's regular traffic of information backwards and forwards on this and also on Facebook. And that in itself has spurred a tremendous amount of media interest. And these are only the channels and film companies that have filmed either in the museum or the stuff that the Trust is doing within the last year. So it's been a tremendously busy year in terms of the media. And most of these programs will be coming out over the next, probably about the next 12 months. I think the Roman Roads one, which was filmed with Dan Jones, has already aired on Channel 5. And this is them filming actually in Abbey House. And we've also had the Antiques Road Trip. They came and filmed in the museum, and it will probably be coming out in April, so watch out for that one as well. Phase 2, I need to briefly mention what we've seen so far has been Phase 1. The thing about Phase 2, I'll not run through the actual interior of the museum itself because you've already seen that, but Phase 2, potentially when it goes ahead, will give us a much brighter, airier feel to the museum, and it acts as a multi-purpose space, not just for the Trust and members of the Trust, but actually for the local community as well. And it acts as a space that allows people to meet, it allows for educational activities, and it would allow for social events as well. So we've started the fundraising for this. As you know, that Phase 1 cost 1.3 to 1.4 million. He says with a croak in his voice because it was a major push to get that. But this is actually, paradoxically, a lot cheaper. This is about 500,000, to which we've already had pledged 55,000, which will become available once the fundraising starts in earnest for this. So this is what Phase 2 will look like, and that will go out on the drying green when it's complete. On a lighter note, just here is Ari, our Roman Centurion, who has spent almost 30 years in the corridor at the Ormiston. It's been an exceptionally long guard duty that he's had there, and at just at the September time, he was able to escape and was found to be lurking around various parts of Melrose, and managing to get well out of the way as the new building work got underway. And he's been traced across the town, as you can see, shooting past the Abbey towards the back end of Abbey House, and he was caught on the cameras in Burt's Hotel car park, spraying "I have been let loose" on the wall. So that's very interesting that Harry is now out and about. So he'll be making his reappearance, of course, when the new museum opens. So the latter part of my talk, that brings you really up to date with where we're at. We're looking at an opening probably in June, possibly pushed into July a bit if there are any unforeseen circumstances of next year, and with Phase 2 following on behind that once the fundraising is complete. So the latter part of my talk is going to be about what's new in Roman Iron Age Scotland. As you can imagine, there's been not a tremendous amount of activity out there over the last year. Most excavations and communal groupings of people have ground to a halt during that period. So there's not been a tremendous amount of physical activity. But one of the big things, certainly in my view, that's happened over the last year was something that was long overdue, and that was recognition of the work that Professor Lawrence Keppie has done for the understanding of the Roman Iron Age in Scotland over a whole working lifetime. And Lawrence, as you know, is the Emeritus Professor of Roman Archaeology of Glasgow University, but he's also a very old friend to the Trust. And in the upper right, you can see the book that he wrote for sale in the Trust about Pontius Pilate, the story behind the myth that Pontius Pilate was connected to Scotland, and below a much more serious document that he co-edited with Fraser Hunter, and that is the Centenary Newstead Frontier book. And Lawrence is a prodigious author, not just of academic papers, but also of very readable archaeological books, Roman archaeology books, and I can strongly recommend all of them. But as a recognition for Lawrence's work over the last 4 decades, a festschrift was produced at the start of this year. As I mentioned, Lawrence has been a close friend to the Trust. He's led us on several outings. In the middle here is a trip he took us to Secret Rome. On the top left, accompanied me to Spain last year, and he was a great supporter of the work that we did at Burnsworth, as you can see in the upper right. And he's always a good laugh when he comes along to any of these things. As you can well imagine, he's got a very wicked sense of humour. But to top all of that has been the publication of this. And I've got a copy here. It's published by Archaeopress, and it's the combined thoughts of all the leading lights in Roman archaeology in Scotland. And it's centred around the Antonine Wall, which has been the favourite haunt of Lawrence over the last 4 decades. And I would strongly recommend it to anybody who's got an interest in Roman Scotland. It's a very reasonable price. I'm just looking to see how much I paid for it. I think it was about £28, which is very, very good. And it's absolutely stuffed with fantastic stuff. And I'm going to come back to it in a second or two. But as I mentioned, Lawrence's stomping ground was the Antonine Wall. This is Croy Hill here, taken from one of my drones. And this is the ditch cut through solid rock at this point. It's about 30 feet across. You can't really get a feel for the scale of this thing. And in the far right, you can just see the ditch creeping up a little green part of the hill, and that's Bar Hill in the distance, in the distant right. And this is the centre of Bar Hill Fort here, which was the scene of one of Lawrence's big publications on the re-excavation of Bar Hill Roman Fort. This is the Principia, the headquarters building with the well in the forecourt here. And it was from that well that a huge amount of material was extracted that Lawrence helped publicise and put Bar Hill, the understanding of Bar Hill and what it meant, on the map. I've known Lawrence for a long time. This was a photograph taken at the start of the excavation of Baudwell Hall Roman Fort, and Lawrence is the handsome young chap here on the right. I'm not actually in this photograph, but this is one of my photographs here of the dig, and you can see Lawrence there in a trench up to his knees. And what a dig it was fantastic. It was my first experience of Roman archaeology. And that was in the early 70s. And I thought I'd just take you back there to that same bathhouse now, which is in the public park, in the Strathclyde Public Park on the banks of the Clyde near Hamilton. And it is definitely well worth a visit, particularly if you've got one of the new drones. And I just want to mention this very briefly. These things now are marginally bigger than a sparrow and will fly 10 kilometers with a 4K camera. And some of the images are pretty gobsmacking. So what I've been trying to do is complement some of our work with some new imagery to help put things in perspective. So this is the bathhouse at Baudwell Hall in full colour. But I decided to look at other bathhouses at the same time. And this is the one in Bearsden. This is taken from across the road. And you can see that it's a very sort of similar outline and very similar shape. And wouldn't it be fantastic if we were able to re-excavate the bathhouse at Newstead? So that's maybe a thing for a future generation to think about, because quite a lot of it still exists underneath the fields at Newstead. But buried within this same book is a paper, a key paper, I believe, that sheds a little light on one of the conundrums that we face at Newstead. And that is the date of the abandonment, and perhaps something that helps explain the features of the abandonment on the first occasion from the time that the Romans abandoned the fort. For those of you who don't know, the Romans appear to have abandoned Newstead twice, once at the end of the Flavian Trajanic period and once at the end of the Antonine period. And that has been the point of contention, academic contention, for many years, and it led to a major bust-up between these two men. On the left, Sir George MacDonald, who excavated many of the Roman sites in Scotland, and on the right, Professor Eric Birley, who was the grandfather of the current Andrew Birley, who is the Director of Excavations at Vindlanda. And Eric Birley was a major light in Hadrian's wall studies, and Sir George MacDonald was a major light in the understanding of Roman Scotland. And the thing that actually drove the two men apart was, in fact, the date of the first abandonment of Trimontium. And this had, there was reasoning behind this that seemed to support two separate views. On the right, the view of Eric Birley was that the fort had been abandoned sometime just before 100 AD, and the Roman forces had moved to the south. He based this effectively on an understanding of the pottery from Newstead. And Sir George MacDonald on the left suggested it was 120 AD, and that was based on his interpretation of the coins from Newstead. In the end, actually, Sir George MacDonald died while the argument was still in full flight. This argument took place in academic journals over a course of about 5 or 6 years, and it actually became quite vitriolic, and it gave me a bit of an insight into the world of archaeology, to be honest. And we have an issue here of what's the relevance of that? What's the relevance of 20 years? And the answer is quite a lot, because below right here, you'll see James Currell, our local hero, who investigated the fort from 1905 to 1910, and almost unbelievably published his results by 1911. Now that is amazing when you consider that we still don't have the publication for the work that was done in 1990s at the fort. Currell was able to get the publication out there with all its references and with all his investigations being fully published within a year, which is quite a remarkable feat. But Currell wondered almost instantly why the fort had been deserted on this first occasion and why so much material had been concealed, this Trimontium treasure of material that you can see spread out here before you, from jewellery to face masks, to animals, to human skeletons, gemstones, cavalry equipment, and so on. Currell was convinced that there had been signs of some great disaster. And this was his take. There was evidence of burning. There was evidence of destruction on multiple levels. And as you can see here, these are 4 of the horse skulls that were found in this particular pit. This is pit 17. And we've scanned these skulls now at the Borders General so that we can have 3-dimensional models of them. And they're being reconstructed as we speak by laser printing, so that we can get to handle them without endangering the fragile original items. And on the far left, you can see that the horse there has a huge hole in its forehead. And that horse has been poleaxed. It's been killed deliberately before being flung into the wells. And in Currell's report, you can see at the bottom, it says the auxiliaries who held the fort during the 1st century had 14 Hans horses, that's full-sized horses, as fine in head and limb as modern high-caste Arab stallions. So we've got a situation where the Romans actually slaughtered healthy, useful animals and piled them into the pits, along with the skeletons of humans and lots of usable equipment. And Curl summarised this in his description of Pit 17, which will form one of the focal points of the new museum. And that is that he says a skeleton of a dwarf was buried beneath the bones and skulls of horses. In Pit 23, a skull cleft with the blow of some sharp weapon was lying beside well buckets with heavy wheels and long birch branches above it, and so on and so forth, weaponry, blacksmith equipment, and so on. In his view, that nearly every pit of which finds that were found to be important belonged to the abandonment of this early period. And he saw it as being some disaster. And these things could not have been just thrown away as rubbish. Now, this is a contentious view and has been contentious ever since Curl made that observation over 100 years ago. But Sir George MacDonald absolutely honed it down on his interpretation of the coins that had been found at Newstead. And in his view, it looked as if the abandonment of Newstead for the first occasion, before the Romans came back again in the Antonine period, might have coincided with the building of Hadrian's Wall, and that put the abandonment of Newstead at a time of great turmoil in the south of Scotland and in the north of England, or the parts of the country that ultimately became known as the south of Scotland and the north of England. And that made the concealment of the material at Newstead coeval, coterminous with the Ribchester hoard, which is an extraordinary hoard. And I've already mentioned the Ribchester face mask, which is the only other face mask from Britain in public hands. And on the right, the Corbridge hoard of Roman military material that was concealed below the floor of a building that was hastily deserted in 120 AD. So both of these hoards, it was estimated, were abandoned or concealed round about 120 AD. And so George MacDonald was suggesting that that may have been when that Newstead was abandoned. So to take you back then to Lawrence's Festschrift book, this paper by Richard Brickstock, which you might have skipped past unless you were really looking at the fine detail of it, he looked at the wear on the coins from Newstead and also the wear on the coins from Falkirk, from the big fort at Falkirk at Camelin, and he's using his technique of estimating the mint dates from the inscriptions on the coins and looking at the amount of wear. He could therefore suggest the dates of deposition. Now, as we've heard earlier, Eric Birley said that Scotland was deserted by either 95 to 100 AD. But you can see that Brickstock's work suggests that coins were being deposited at Camelin at Falkirk up to about 117 AD. And it's even more noticeable when he came to look at the coins at Newstead that coins were being put into the ground in significant numbers right up to the time almost of Hadrian. So this new work of Brickstock's that's been published in Lawrence's book would tend to support Sir George MacDonald's view that Newstead, the desertion of Newstead after that first period, took place during this period of great turmoil. And those of you who have watched our stories, Stones and Bones, this is the first of our 3 stories where the Centurion, our hero in the Trimontium series of filmlets, organises the abandonment of the fort during this point of great turmoil. So who knows, maybe this new work adds something to this interpretation. And almost as if by magic, and just in the last couple of years, new work at Vindolanda has shown the state of affairs in the late second decade of the 2nd century, round about 120 AD, where they've found evidence of tremendous turmoil and with weaponry simply abandoned, strewn across the floors of barrack blocks. Now, Mike Bishop, who's the great doyen of Roman military equipment, will tell you, you do not simply lose a sword in the Iron Age. They were exceptionally valuable. So whatever happened here happened probably in a hurry and happened under circumstances that were probably less than advantageous for the Roman garrison. So it may well be that what happened at Vindolanda is the same as what happened at Ribchester, and possibly the same as what happened at Newstead, all round about the same time. So it kind of opens up a whole new avenue of inquiry that was first suggested almost a century ago. So finally, what have we got coming up in 2021? We've heard from Rob that we've got some more lectures coming up, and we're hoping that Lawrence will be able to come back and give us his long-delayed film night of Antonine Wall videos and Roman Scotland videos from the past. And we're looking forward to that. But coming up quite soon, we've got a great talk from Louisa Campbell, and this was presaged again in Lawrence's book on the Antonine Wall distance sculptures, and Louisa's probably going to come and speak to us, I think, in February, so that'll be one not to miss. And these sculptures are absolutely fantastic. In terms of outreach, we're hoping to do some work as part of the activity plan for the new museum at Torwood Lee. This is the Broch and the Hill Fort at Torwood Lee. I'll just play that again so that you can get a real view of the ditches of the hill fort surrounding the Broch. And James Pringle, who is the landowner, has graciously agreed to allow us to do some more survey work there, and that will hopefully get us out of our shells in 2021. Also, Professor Gordon Noble from Aberdeen University has just been in touch with us, and also the Duke of Buccleuch, to allow us to do some additional work. The Duke has allowed us to do some additional work with Professor Noble at Eildon Hill North. And Professor Noble's taken a particular interest in the dating of the abandonments of Eildon Hill North. So that hopefully will give us a whole new picture of the relationship between the native peoples who were based on Eildon Hill and the Roman fort. And a lot of this will be involving very, very clever methods of close dating of material from the site. So it will also hopefully give volunteers an opportunity to do some hands-on work locally. Also, hopefully in 2021, we will be able to do some more work with our friends from Germany, the RGK, the Limes Commission, who hope to come and do more geophysics at Newstead and across the borders. They've been beavering away in the background at satellite work of the area, and they're hoping to bring their geophysics equipment back again in 2021. For my own part, I've been doing a lot more aerial survey, and I've been inspired by this book of Richard Tipping's. Richard hopefully is someone who will come and lecture to us as well, because what he does is he helps us understand the land use, and through that, the actual people who lived in the area at the time of the Roman invasion. And on the left-hand side here, you can see this is a map of the density of Iron Age hill forts in Scotland and the north of England. And you can see that we here in the borders live in one of the incredibly densest areas of hill forts. So investigation of these hill forts will give us more idea of what actually was going on at the time of the Roman invasion. And one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in are these cultivation terraces. These are the ones at Hunham, but these stretch right across the whole border area. And they were originally thought to be Dark Age or potentially medieval, but now Richard Tipping's work is starting to show that these go way back to the Bronze Age. And these are massive field systems. So the population here during the Roman Iron Age was probably very substantial indeed. So more work, I think, to do there, and more work to record and investigate the great heritage that we've got of the Iron Age in the area. This is Pinel Hoch near Ancram, fantastic hill fort, and also Woden Law here. And in the background of Woden Law is a reminder of this connection with ancient Rome, because within spitting distance of one of the biggest hill forts in the borders is one of the biggest Roman marching camps. And this is the one here at Pennymuir, absolutely huge, would have taken thousands of men to fill that. And that in the background, the hump in the background, is Woden Law. So you can see the proximity here of these hill forts to the Roman fortifications. So lots of interesting connections to explore. So thank you all very much for that. Thank you for your patience for that gallop through what's new at Trimontium, and also what's new at Roman Scotland.